Welcome to the InnoGuide podcast, where we share the works of authors and mentors to guide innovation. I'm your host, Bob Boudelier. This podcast, my website, my newsletter, and my community are focused on helping you discover the secrets of innovation in the age of AI. Since I don't rely on paid ads, I want to thank our customers who bring me into their programs as a technical product accelerator to work alongside their teams, helping them develop products smarter and faster without adding risk, while bringing human-centered AI skills into their organizations. You can learn more at www.innoguide.net. In this episode, number 96, we'll be sharing part 2 of Slack, Getting Past Burnout, Busywork, and the Myth of Total Efficiency by Tom DeMarco. Let's get started. Let's talk about quality. Quality as a corporate movement has become mostly lip service. We spend $1 billion annually on conferences, seminars, and posters proclaiming quality as job one, yet this constant affirmation hasn't actually improved anything. It's like our endless talk about apple pie and motherhood. Meanwhile, both have declined. Here's the core problem when organizations lack Slack. When there's no time or staff buffer, quality programs become a joke. Lost time in an early project gets made up by cutting corners later, and quality inevitably suffers. Yet these same organizations never stop announcing their commitment to quality while making the exact trade-offs that make quality impossible. He defines quality through a real example here. Adobe Photoshop is the best software ever made, not because it's defect-free, but because it's unique, deeply thought out, revolutionary, and fundamentally transforms how people work. Of the 9 reasons for this judgment, only one concerns the absence of defects. Real quality has almost nothing to do with defects. But corporate quality programs focus almost exclusively on defect elimination. That's the trap. They address maybe 1/9 of what quality actually means, while potentially hindering the rest through overhead, risk aversion, and organizational bureaucracy. Here's what nobody wants to hear. Quality requires time, and quality creates an inverse relationship with quantity. To achieve real quality, you must make less and choose what you make far more carefully. Reduce your product portfolio to focus resources on work that really matters. The efficiency-obsessed organization sees quality as the enemy. Many so-called quality programs are actually quality reduction programs in disguise, shifting cost to customers under the guise of efficiency. Until you're willing to make that trade to produce less in order to produce better, all your quality initiatives are just theater. Real quality isn't a program you announce, it's a choice you live by. How about the difference between being efficient or effective? This is a distinction that most organizations get dangerously wrong, the difference between being efficient and effective. The core problem is this: you're efficient when you do something with minimum waste. You're effective when you're doing the right thing. These aren't the same thing at all. In fact, you can excel at one while completely failing at the other. Imagine 2 companies. One is efficient but not effective. It's optimized, streamlined, moving fast in entirely the wrong direction. In Yogi Berra's memorable words, it's lost but making good time. The other company is effective but not efficient. It moves steadily, if slowly, toward its real goals. If I force you to choose, which would you pick? The answer is obvious. An efficient company heading the wrong way is far worse than an effective company moving slowly in the right direction. So why do so many organizations choose efficiency over effectiveness? Part of the answer is what he calls the easy executive option. True leadership, building consensus, creating a vision, setting genuine strategic direction, is really difficult. But appearing to lead is very easy. You simply note which way the organization is already drifting and declare, that's the direction you're heading. General Motors did this for decades, ceding small vehicles and fuel efficiency to foreign competitors while pretending to lead. There's also something called Fisher's fundamental theorem, named after geneticist R.A. Fisher. It states that the more adapted an organism becomes, the less adaptable it is to change. Think of the giraffe, perfectly designed for reaching leaves high in trees, yet unable to pick up a peanut from the ground. Organizations optimized for efficiency become similarly rigid, losing the slack necessary for innovation and risk-taking. The tragedy is this. In volatile modern markets, companies must take risks to succeed. But the efficiency imperative makes them risk-averse. They choose the safe, optimized path over the promising but risky new direction. The question becomes, what management philosophy drives this self-defeating choice? That answer lies ahead. So let's talk about management by objectives. Sounds like a sensible idea. It's been around since the 50s and it still shows up everywhere. But it doesn't work. Yet companies keep doing it anyway, and when it fails, which it always does, they respond by doing even more of it. Here's how management by objectives works in theory. You pick one or two numbers to represent how your department is performing. You tell managers to hit those targets, and if they do, success. The underlying assumption is simple. If every department improves its particular metric, the whole company improves. Sounds logical, right? Except it's not. First problem is management by objectives, MBO, requires everything to stay the same. It says, do everything exactly as you did last year, just do more of it. This might have worked in a stable economy, but today's successful companies operate in constant flux. They're organized around projects and change, not steady states. Telling your organization to maintain the status quo while tinkering at the margins is a path toward extinction. The second problem is what Harvard professor Rob Austin calls dysfunction. You can't reduce a department's entire contribution to a single number. Something complex always gets lost. Austin offers a perfect example. A Soviet nail factory is told to maximize nails produced. They produce a record number, all tiny brads nobody wants. So the objective changes to maximizing tonnage. Now they produce only enormous railway spikes. Both times the objective was met. Both times the real goal failed. When dysfunction happens, MBO believers simply redefine the objectives and try again. After 50 years, they're still trying, still waiting for results. W. Edwards Deming saw this clearly. He called management by objectives out in his famous 14 points, arguing that it replaces workers' intrinsic motivation, pride in quality work, with artificial external motivators. A salesperson chasing a sales quota stops caring about customer satisfaction. The diagnosis is clear. MBO is central planning for corporations, and like Soviet-style economics, its time has passed. Get rid of it. So let's talk about organizational change and growth. And he wants to be direct with us from the start. You can't grow if you can't change. This seems obvious, but he encounters organizations constantly that openly admit they're stuck, completely unable to change. Yet they still expect growth to happen. Then they're shocked when it doesn't materialize. He sees this time and time again. Companies treat these as two separate problems. Problem one, we can't change. Problem two, we can't grow. But that's missing the forest for the trees. The second problem is a consequence of the first. What's really puzzling is that even these change-resistant organizations will talk a good game about flexibility. They might be trapped in a deep rut with no idea how to escape, yet they'll cheerfully discuss flexibility as though it's money in the bank. Spoiler alert, their account balance is zero. These companies implement steps they believe will improve performance, but often those very steps are the barriers to change he's identified throughout the book. Talking about reduced slack, standardized processes locked in concrete, and documentation so voluminous that it becomes its own prison. Sounds like medtech. Now, making organizational change possible, which ultimately enables growth, requires far more than simply removing barriers. Yes, you need to remove the obstacles, but you also need vision, leadership, timing, and slack. Think of slack as the lubricant that makes everything work. Vision and leadership depend entirely on degrees of freedom. When you box in your most talented people, your potential visionaries and leaders, and constrain them too tightly, the magic doesn't happen. In this section, he's tackling the ambitious work of making change and therefore growth genuinely possible in your organization. It's not simple, but it is essential. Let's start with vision. He talks about a dinner party he attends at his friend Sheila Brady's home in Woodside, California. It was pouring rain, wind was whipping through the eucalyptus trees, and the wine was flowing. Perfect setting for some honest conversation. Sheila had worked at Apple as a star project manager, but that night the conversation turned to something she'd observed in Silicon Valley startups, the absence of vision. One particularly striking example she shared involved a dot-com company where everyone's real goal was simply getting rich and retiring as quickly as possible. During a strategy meeting, when someone suggested adding an auction component because eBay was hot that month, they actually spent hours discussing it. The problem? They had nothing to auction and no auction expertise. What was missing, Sheila said, was someone willing to say, auction might be nice, but it just isn't us. That simple phrase captures everything about vision. A company without vision can't answer the question, who are we? More importantly, it can't even answer, who aren't we? And when employees can't feel a clear sense of identity, they know it. They can smell the absence of vision the way a dog smells fear. Here's why this matters. Vision is absolutely essential for real constructive change. When you read the business section of New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, you'll inevitably find the story of a struggling company that suddenly turns around. A new leader arrives, hired from outside or promoted within, and suddenly there's momentum, hope, and rising stock prices. What actually happened in those crucial early months? The answer is simple. The new leader gained trust. Without it, there's no leadership and no turnaround. But here's the paradox. We're all taught that you gain trust by demonstrating trustworthiness, right? Think about it logically. How can you demonstrate trustworthiness without something being entrusted to you first? It's circular. The truth our mentors never quite said out loud was this. You gain trust by giving undeserved trust. Parents actually operate by a different rule than the one they teach. They give trust slightly in advance of demonstrated trustworthiness, a bicycle, a later curfew, responsibility for a younger sibling. They knew something about human nature that they couldn't quite articulate. Emerging leaders understand this instinctively. They don't have time to prove themselves through performance. Instead, they acquire what I call the not yet deserved trust, he says, through personal magnetism and, most importantly, by giving trust first. He watched this years ago on an airplane in Sydney. He says this, I watched this years ago on an airplane in Sydney. I offered to help a mother with her luggage. Without hesitation, she placed her young daughter in my arms. That 3-minute encounter affected me for 19 years. The giving of trust is powerful. Throughout my career, I worked under remarkable managers who gave me responsibility just slightly before I'd completely earned it. I was terrified, yes, but I was also determined not to disappoint them. That's the magic of trust given in advance. Great leaders have an unerring instinct for how much trust each person is ready for. Give too little and you stifle them. Give too much and you set them up for failure. The sweet spot, the trust given just slightly ahead of demonstrated readiness, creates unshakable loyalty. If you want to lead effectively, the path is clear. Give trust to gain it. What about the timing of change? We're going to explore the most crucial yet misunderstood aspects of organizational leadership, this timing of change. There's a famous saying that says it perfectly. To everything, it's a song. To everything, turn, turn, turn. There is a season. And that wisdom applies directly to transforming your organization. Because doing the right thing at the wrong time is worse than doing nothing at all. Now, conventional wisdom tells us, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But that advice pushes us in the wrong direction. Forces leaders to wait until crisis hits before attempting any transformation. By then, you're introducing change into an organization that's already anxious, worried about survival, and that's a recipe for failure. Think of yourself as David facing Goliath, except Goliath is the resistance you'll encounter. And unlike the biblical story, you probably won't have divine support. The resistance you face isn't logical, it's emotional. People define themselves through their work. Change threatens their identity. When they're already anxious about layoffs or company stability, introducing change feels like adding insult to injury. Here's where timing becomes everything. The absolute worst moment to introduce change is during sudden corporate decline. People are stressed, uncertain, defensive. Their emotional walls are sky high. But think of the opposite scenario, a period of healthy growth. Growth feels like winning. It creates psychological openings for change because people are already in a mindset of expansion and possibility. When a company is growing and thriving, the changes necessary to accommodate that success, hiring new people, expanding facilities, reorganizing departments, these feel natural, even exciting. Growth-related change meets far less resistance because it's connected to something people feel good about. That's your window of opportunity. So if you're tasked with transformation, don't wait for a crisis. Plant your seeds of change during prosperity, when your organization's emotional soil is fertile and ready. That's not just good leadership. That's strategic wisdom. Real change requires a foundation, what Peter Drucker calls culture, those unchangeable principles that define what an organization stands for. A visionary statement declares who you are. Think of Kennedy's, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. That works because it balances present truth with inspiring possibility. It's grounded in reality while pulling people towards something better. The remarkable truth is this: people want to be led. When an organization finds its vision and someone takes the helm, the relief is palpable. Leadership becomes possible because people are desperate to be enrolled in something meaningful. So let's talk about real leadership versus leadership in quotes. He starts with a story that illustrates this problem perfectly. In September 1989, President George Bush stood before the governors from all 50 states and thundered that American youth would be number one in science and math by the year 2000. That was just 11 years away. He repeated it, emphasized it, and then nothing happened. He made a bold declaration and walked away. As we moved toward 2000, American students were still performing dismally in math and science, right where they'd been since 1989. That is leadership in quotes. It's posturing without follow-through. Here's what real leadership actually is: the ability to enroll other people in your agenda, even when it requires them to accept short-term pain for long-term gain. And it requires 4 essential elements. First, you need clear articulation of the direction. Second, you have to frankly admit the short-term pain involved. Third, fourth, and fifth, follow up, follow up, follow up. When you got the first element and none of the others, that's just leadership in quotes. Now contrast Bush's hollow posturing with Nokia's transformation. In 1960, 2 engineers envisioned a completely different company, high-tech instead of paper and pulp. But here's the thing: there was no single dramatic moment. Instead, there was a broad spectrum of measures at every level to keep people enrolled. Every manager became responsible for leadership. That was the real thing they did. One final crucial point: don't fall back on the excuse of insufficient power. Yes, President Bush claimed his country didn't have the wallet for education reform, but the truth is power is never sufficient. Real leadership happens when relatively powerless people enroll others through influence rather than force. The greatest acts of leadership often flow sideways and upward in organizations, from people with no official authority to make anyone do anything. That's when you know you're witnessing the real thing. Here's a section I really loved. He's talking about Scott Adams' creation Dilbert, and his relationship with both of these changed over the years. Scott Adams is one of his heroes. His daily insights into corporate life, wrapped in brilliant humor, represent a great body of work. But here's what he needs to reconsider. Dilbert himself isn't a hero. Dilbert's a jerk. He keeps his head down, accepts absurd directives without question, never rocking the boat. And frankly, it's people like Dilbert who make bad management possible. He visits companies all the time where Dilbert cartoons are posted on cubicle walls as some kind of badge of solidarity. And he always wants to ask, yes, but are you like Dilbert? Are you accepting senseless direction? Are you letting bureaucracy dominate? The answer is yes, you're part of the problem. Here's my challenge to you. The next time you see a Dilbert cartoon, ask yourself how he should have responded. What could he have done to make that absurd situation distinctly non-funny? How could he have stopped it? There's always an answer, though sometimes, yes, it might cost him his job. Now, over 35 years of speaking, he noticed something fascinating. After presenting on needed organizational change, people constantly tell him, I wish my boss could have heard that. Even the senior executives say it. They too have bosses. But here's what he's learned. That person wishing their boss were there, they're the exact right person to make the change happen. That wish they're expressing, it's resistance to the real message that they could lead this effort. It requires managing upward, calling in favors, working sideways across the organization. In other words, it requires leadership from everywhere. The most exciting companies he knows don't have an ethic of followership. They have rotating leadership where anyone can step up when they have the inspiration of the moment. Leadership is not an elite function. It's everybody's business. The question isn't who will lead. The question is, will you lead? What about fear and safety? We're all taught as children, sticks and stones can break my bones, but names can never hurt me. This saying appears in virtually every language across the world. But what does that saying really mean? Because in the context of organizational change, it's backwards. The single must-have ingredient for successful organizational change is psychological safety, not physical safety, but the kind that allows people to be vulnerable at work, to experiment, to try things. When you ask people to change how they work, you're asking them to abandon mastery. Your employees have spent years getting really good at what they do. Their professional identity is wrapped up in that competence. Now you're asking them to become beginners again, to become novices at something that matters deeply to how they see themselves. That's terrifying. People resist. But here's the key. Coercion doesn't work. You can't force meaningful change. You can only create conditions where it becomes possible. Fear itself isn't always the problem. Skydivers and ice climbers learn their skills while terrified. That kind of fear of physical danger or job loss doesn't necessarily stop change. It's a different kind of fear that kills it, the fear of mockery. If you mock people as they struggle with new ways to do things, if you belittle them, roll your eyes, or respond with sarcasm when they make mistakes, you will make change impossible. There are no surer ways to freeze an organization in place. The safety people need during change is clear, a felt sense that they will be honored for trying, respected for struggling, valued for failing. Because every failure teaches something vital. The person who fails isn't a liability. They're the backbone of your change effort. So forget the sticks and stones. In your organization, eliminate the names, remove mockery, sarcasm, and public humiliation from your culture. Replace them with genuine respect for people doing difficult things. Make this one essential change, and you'll make every other change possible. How about managing transitions? Most people assume change happens at the top. The CEO has a vision, makes a decision, and change cascades downward. Or maybe they think it happens at the bottom, where the frontline employees do the work. But neither of these are correct. Change, real meaningful reinvention, happens in the middle. Top management may provide the incentive and direction, but they've lost touch with day-to-day operations. They can't possibly reinvent what they don't understand. And people at the bottom lack both the perspective and the authority to drive organizational transformation. That leaves the middle. This is critical. The companies that survive economic turmoil are the ones with vital, confident middle managers at levels 2 through 4. The ones that struggle are those that decimated these positions in the name of trimming the fat. But here's what they didn't realize. That fat was actually the slack, the time to think, the time to innovate. And this brings us to his first requirement for reinvention. Middle managers need slack. They need hours in the week not consumed by operations because reinvention is impossible when people are too busy just managing the day-to-day. If your managers are constantly overwhelmed, that's not efficiency. That's a failure of vision. But slack alone isn't enough. Middle managers work in isolation from one another, trapped in silos and competitive tension. They need psychological safety to collaborate and take risks together. And here's the paradox. You can't foster risk-taking through punishment for failure. You need an environment where intelligent failures are tolerated and even expected. So the formula is clear. Maintain a robust middle management layer, give them slack, create safety, and break down isolation. This enables the organizational learning that drives reinvention. It sounds simple until you try it. So where does learning happen? Learning and change are inseparable. You can't transform an organization without people learning new skills and adopting new approaches. But we're naturally learning machines. Our brains never stop, whether we're reading history or talking with family. The challenge isn't getting people to learn, it's getting them to learn things that actually matter. Organizations are constantly absorbing information, but not all of it sticks, not all of it helps. The real trick is intentionally building habits around learning the specific skills that drive meaningful change. He shares something he discovered from his early teaching days. When people encounter something that genuinely matters to their work, something that shows their current approach is outdated, they panic. Their faces go white, their stomachs flip. In those moments, they need support. They need a facilitator, material to practice with, and co-learners whose faces are equally pale. Without this full environment, people would dismiss the new idea as preposterous and move on. Sounds like AI. That's exactly why teams matter so much. Well-gelled teams provide the perfect learning ecosystem. There's a coach, someone ahead of you on the journey, There's material, real work carved out for you to master new skills, and there are co-learners experiencing the same discomfort you are. But here's what troubles him. Most organizations confine real teams to the bottom levels. Where are the management teams learning together? The answer is almost nowhere. Our weekly status meetings aren't meetings at all. They're ceremonies where managers take turns reporting to the boss. Real management teams where leaders share responsibility and decisions together are remarkably rare. The truth is, significant organizational learning happens in what he calls the white space, the spaces between peer managers and where they actually communicate and share accountability. That's where reinvention happens. If your organization has vital, communicative white space, particularly at the middle, transformation is possible. Without it, nothing changes. So let's talk about danger in that white space. When companies get stuck, they often reshuffle their org chart, moving boxes around hoping for a breakthrough. But here's what they should really examine: the white space between those boxes. In healthy organizations, the white space is where collaboration happens and learning thrives. In broken organizations, it becomes a minefield. He once had a manager say over lunch, "I'm afraid of my peer managers." His company had deliberately pitted managers against each other, creating an environment where another manager's success felt like his failure. Of course, everyone felt the same way. They were constantly undermining each other. When you find this kind of internal competition, you'll inevitably hear a senior leader say, "A little healthy competition won't hurt them." But there's no such thing as healthy competition in a knowledge organization. Knowledge work is inherently collaborative. You can't do it alone. When managers encourage competition among subordinates while expecting them to cooperate, they're banking on professionalism to bridge the gap. That's really optimistic. When you give people direct incentives to compete, you can't reasonably expect them to refrain from playing to win. Here's the pattern. Competition thrives under authoritarian management. These managers obsess over efficiency and eliminate slack, the extra time and resources needed for learning. But without slack, there's no room for reinvention. This brings us to corporate training, which in slackless organizations becomes non-learning in disguise. Real training requires slowing down. Learning piano means playing one phrase at 1/10 the speed over and over. Most corporate training, you're given new information and immediately expected to perform at expert speed. That's efficiency theater, not training. True training requires time, often double or triple the expert timeline. In today's hurry-up culture, it's simply not happening. And that's the real danger lurking in those white spaces between the boxes. Here's a concept that changed how he thought about organizational problems. It was a friend and Atlantic Systems Guild colleague, Suzanne Robertson, who coined the wonderfully dramatic phrase, danger in the white space, to describe something he'd been observing for years without quite understanding it. See, many organizations suffer from what he calls non-learning. They're trapped in environments so concerned with the hurry-up message, there's no room for genuine learning to happen. It's like trying to read a book in a speeding car with the radio blaring. There's too much noise, too much urgency, and nowhere safe to really absorb anything new. After studying this problem exhaustively, he realized that transforming a non-learning organization requires two fundamental changes. First, you have to drive internal competition out and replace it with genuine cooperation, collaboration, and joint ownership among managers. Second, you need to reclaim time for the practice stages of training. People need space to exercise those new skills at a slower than expert rate without fear of judgment or failure. Here's the tricky part. It's simple to state these solutions, but genuinely implementing them is significantly more complicated. It requires swimming against the current of organizational culture that rewards speed above all else. It demands that leaders resist the constant pressure to demonstrate immediate returns and instead invest in the slower, messier work of true learning and development. The white space that Suzanne so aptly named isn't just empty, it's dangerous precisely because organizations don't know how to use it. They treat it as wasted time rather than essential room for growth. He says, "My challenge throughout this book is to help you see that space differently, not as a liability, but as the crucial foundation upon which genuine organizational learning must be built." What about change management? It's a term he's found almost touchingly optimistic, he says. It suggests you can manage change the way you manage a mailroom or a regional office. If that were only true. Here's a better analogy. Managing change is more like cancer management. He doesn't mean change is undesirable. He means it's uncertain and nearly impossible to steer. It has its own course to run. But influence in the hands of a talented manager can accomplish far more than total control in the hands of someone without talent. Think about the difference between running a mailroom during the day and coaching Little League in the spring. The mailroom, you tell people once what to do and they do it. On the ball field, you repeat everything endlessly. Cajole, encourage, correct, and motivate. That's the kind of management change demands. The rules are fundamentally different during change. Normally, management operates on what he calls the cardinal rule. I'm the boss, you're not, so do what I say. But during change, this rule is suspended. You can't tell if someone's genuinely struggling or is simply rejecting the change. Your authority evaporates. You become a negotiator relying on persuasion and influence rather than positional power. Here's something else that shifts. The reward structure. In normal businesses, you get paid after you work. There's an understood contract. During change, this breaks down. The reward has to come first in the form of trust you've already built. Great change managers have accumulated markers, favors, and credibility from the past, social capital, if you will. They tap into this reservoir to entice people through uncertainty. This is devastating for a new manager brought in to command change. They have no social capital, no trust account to draw from. The factory model where the boss commands and the workers obey doesn't work during change. It doesn't work well in knowledge organizations, even during stable times. Knowledge workers respond to persuasion, negotiation, and accumulated trust, not authority alone. Real change management isn't about control. It's about influence. And influence applied skillfully is often more powerful than control ever could be. What about uncommon sense? Risk management originated in the insurance industry, where executives manage entire portfolios of policy by spreading risk across different geographic regions and coverage types. If one insurer had too many coastal Florida properties, they might exchange some with another company holding California disability coverage. When disaster strikes, no single event wipes either one of them out. Here's what matters. Risks aren't inherently bad. They're the source of profit. Risk management doesn't eliminate risks. It minimizes their impact. And managing risk costs something, whether in transaction fees or lost opportunity, when the bad thing never happens. The problem for project managers is stark. You can't apply insurance-style portfolio management when you're betting everything on a single project. You have stochastic control, the kind you have over employee retention on project delivery dates. No matter how well you set salaries and work conditions, you can't guarantee Harold stays till the project's over. Risk management is also counterintuitive and probabilistic, which directly conflicts with can-do management. That corporate culture where admitting uncertainty sounds like a weakness. So why do it anyway? The answer is explicit declaration of uncertainty. When I assess that your project will likely complete September 1st with a realistic range from June through December, I'm giving you something valuable, precise information about how uncertain you truly are. Without this, 3 terrible things happen. Managers misinterpret no chance before May as meaning May 31st is realistic, or they pick the most likely date and still miss it 2/3 of the time. Worst of all, when projects repeatedly run late, stakeholders stop trusting any assurances and become paralyzingly risk-averse. Here's the paradox. Organizations can't be aggressive about risk-taking without meaningful risk assessment. The real solution? Your company needs both can-do managers and designated can't-do specialists, risk managers whose job is flagging every possible problem. The can-do folks pursue ambitious goals. The risk manager succeeds by warning leadership of everything that might go wrong. Neither can do both jobs simultaneously, but together they create something powerful. Honest assessment paired with determined execution. That's uncommon sense. Risk management, the minimal prescription. So let's start with the simple truth. A risk is a bad thing that might happen, and if it does happen, it lessens your chance of success. Key to managing risk is being explicit about what uncertainties you're facing. There are 2 types of risk to understand. Aggregate risks are the big ones, total project failure. Imagine building a bridge. You might fail to span the river, succeed but at exorbitant cost, finish late and lose all profit, or worse. When aggregate risk materializes, the whole venture fails. But you don't manage aggregate risk directly. Instead, you manage component risks, the specific things that could go wrong and lead to overall failure. Poor engineering, inadequate technology in our bridge example, These are root causes. So what does real risk management look like? You must list and count every risk, have an ongoing process to discover new risks, quantify their impact and likelihood, identify early warning signs, plan in advance how you'll respond. There are two critical practices. The first is risk containment, setting aside a reserve, money and time, to pay for risks that materialize. Not a reserve per risk, but one reserve for the whole project. The goal is a 50-50 confidence level that you'll have enough. Second is risk mitigation, the actions you'll take to reduce the impact. Here's what's crucial. Some mitigation work must happen before the risk materializes. You can't install fire extinguishers after the fire starts. You can't train people to evacuate after the alarm sounds. He sees managers constantly skipping this pre-work because they're under pressure. They think, we'll catch a break so we won't need this. But that's planning for luck, not success. The minimal prescription: know your risks, budget for them explicitly, and do the advanced work that makes mitigation possible. That's how you protect your projects from the inevitable. Working at breakneck speed is another problem. Is faster always better? Let's start with a simple question. What does breakneck speed actually mean? The term comes from physical danger. When you're moving that fast, one misstep and you're finished. You're holding nothing back, courting disaster with every moment. Now here's the uncomfortable truth. The hurry-up mantra tells us to do knowledge work at exactly that speed, and that's a problem. Here's the dirty little secret that many companies miss. Managing risk actually requires going slower than breakneck speed. Yes, you'll finish later than if you were lucky enough to sprint recklessly and never encounter problems, but luck isn't a strategy. Here's a concrete example. Imagine a project with one significant risk that could delay you by up to a year. Your most likely scenario, a 4-month setback. Now, what if you invested time and resources in risk mitigation, say training your key people to handle that risk more effectively? You'd spend a few extra person months up front, but here's what happens. Your most likely completion date moves forward by 6 weeks, and your worst case scenario is cut in half. The catch? Your absolute best case scenario gets a little worse. You've invested time in preparation that might not be needed. Some companies can't see past this. They're planning for success, not managing for reality. This is where we all need to remember something that old sailing ships taught us, the concept of all prudent speed, in quotes. Captains weren't instructed to go recklessly fast. They were told to proceed at a pace that balanced urgency with safety. Prudent speed is deliberately slower than breakneck speed. The difference between these two speeds? That's your slack. And slack is what lets you arrive quickly, but with your neck unbroken. Learning to live with risk. We're living through a fundamental shift in how the world works. When he was growing up, change happened. You went through it, you weathered it, then you got to rest. You reached a new normal, what I call stasis, he says, where you could enjoy the benefits of that change for years to come. Well, those days are gone. Think of it this way. The early 90s operated under Lenin's model of revolution. Tear down the old system, build a new one, and settle in. Today we're living in a different version. Constant, unrelenting transformation. There's no settling in anymore. Stasis isn't a destination, it's nostalgia. Here's the paradox, though. In a world where risk is constant and unavoidable, we're still practicing risk avoidance everywhere. Companies are busy with what he calls initiatives, client-server conversions, minor upgrades, cosmetic redesigns. These projects feel safe because they are, and that's exactly why they need to stop. Every resource you spend on a risk-free project is a resource you're not spending on something transformational. If you identify any initiatives as risk-free, cancel them. The only work worth doing right now is work that thrusts you into new markets, exploits new technologies, and transforms your business. Here's what concerns him most. Many organizations think they're already managing risk. They talk about factories, throughput, efficiency, cost reduction. That's production thinking applied to development work. That's not risk management. That's stasis thinking in a non-stasis world. So how do you know if real risk management is happening to your organization? He's developed 9 hard questions. Do you have a published census of risk? Are fatal risks being managed? Is there one person accountable? Are there conditional tasks that might not need doing? Does your schedule differ markedly from your goal? If you can't answer yes to most of these questions, you're either in risk avoidance mode or taking risks blind. Neither position is sustainable anymore. Welcome to the modern economy. Learning to live with risk isn't optional, it's survival. So he closes with this. He says, I want to be clear about something. The entire book isn't an argument against efficiency, not at all. What he's saying is that efficiency doesn't matter most of all. Think of it this way. If efficiency wins you 1 point in the grand scheme of things, then a little slack combined with inventiveness, risk-taking, and genuine understanding of human relationships can win you 3 points. And that's the real balance we need. To illustrate this, he tells a fable called The Needle in the Haystack. It's about a young tailor who loses a needle and while searching, gets philosophical about the problem. He works through the mathematics, the relationship between the number of needles in the haystack, the number of hay pieces, and the probability of finding the needle in the haystack. He solved it intellectually, but he still can't find the needle. Then a princess arrives. The tailor, taking a risk, asks for her help, and something remarkable happens. As they work together, both of them transform. The tailor discovers he knows nothing about this princess, and suddenly the entire world opens up. Love becomes possible, everything changes. So then what happens? When the princess can't immediately find the needle, she doesn't give up or feel defeated. She reframes the problem entirely. Instead of searching for a needle in a haystack, she searches for hay in a needle stack. She flips the perspective, and it works. She finds her hay. Taylor finds his needle. The goal is achieved. But here's the crucial part. The real goal has changed. The needle no longer matters. What mattered was the connection, the creativity, the human moment they shared. Yet the tailor, in his efficiency-focused mind, doesn't see it. He celebrates finding the needle and walks away. So the question for all of us is simple. Will we be agile enough to recognize when our real goal has shifted? Or will we remain so focused on our needle that we'll miss the princess before our eyes? So with that, Tom's given us quite a bit to think about. Are we missing the forest for the trees? And all the organizations that are trimming their team size, trimming their middle management, all under the guise of AI is replacing these jobs. Is that the right thing to do? If Tom DeMarco, the author of the book, is correct, there'll need to be adjustments to bring back the innovation into these teams because AI is just a tool and it thinks deeply, but you need people who are generalists to pull it all together and know what to do with it. So that wraps this book for today. Remember that our website is www.innoguide.net, where we have many resources for innovators, including those who want to leverage system-level thinking to get their runaway timelines under control in the medical product development process, including those who want to leverage AI in that process without adding risk. And we help those who want to build medical products that will support embedded ML now or in the future. Know that you'll be learning it from someone who's worked in medtech for 30 years, has led teams who developed and delivered 66 medical products. I've also recently launched MedX, our medical executive discussion forum, where leaders gather every month to share insights about how to navigate medical product development in the age of AI. This was inspired by the book Range, where the author talked about other peer groups of this sort and the advantages those groups enjoyed by being part of such a group. If you're interested, join using the MedX forum button on my LinkedIn page. I want to thank Steve McIntyre for producing this, and I really want to thank you for joining us for part 2 of Slack, Getting Past Burnout, Busywork, and the Myth of Total Efficiency by Tom DeMarco. I highly recommend his book. There are a lot of examples that we weren't able to cover in here, and I think you'd enjoy it. Thanks again. That's a wrap.